You've been lied to about Africa. Not through malice necessarily, but through omission, through silence, through the convenient forgetting that happens when history is written by those who conquered, not those who built. Here's what you probably think you know. Africa before European contact was tribal, scattered, primitive. That civilization meant Europe. That history, real history, happened elsewhere. Here's what actually existed. In the year 1324, while Europe was crawling out of medieval darkness, a single African king arrived in Cairo with so much gold that he crashed the entire Mediterranean economy for a decade. His caravan stretched for miles. His wealth was so incomprehensible that Egyptian markets didn't recover for years. At the same moment, on the East African coast, stone cities rose from coral and limestone, their harbors crowded with ships from Arabia, India, China, and Indonesia. Merchants spoke Swahili, Arabic, and Persian in the same conversation. Gold and ivory flowed outward. Silk and porcelain flowed in. Further south, stone walls surrounded a kingdom whose capital was larger than medieval London. No mortar held these stones together, just precision and engineering. The kingdom's cattle herds numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Its trade networks reached both coasts. This wasn't primitive. This wasn't waiting for civilization to arrive. This was power. But here's the thing about power. It's never stable. It's always contested, always shifting, always one decision away from transformation or collapse. These kingdoms didn't exist in isolation, frozen in time, waiting to be discovered. They fought wars. They built empires. They made alliances and broke them. They grew wealthy and grew desperate. They adapted to changing worlds and sometimes failed to adapt fast enough. Their histories are filled with brilliant strategies and catastrophic mistakes, with moments of astonishing resilience and sudden vulnerability. To understand how all of this existed and why so much of it disappeared, we have to go back much further than expected. We have to start when African kingdoms weren't exotic curiosities in world history. They were world history. The year is 700 CE. While Europe fragments into feudal territories and the Islamic Caliphate explodes across the Middle East, something else is happening across the Sahara. Ghana is rising. Not the Ghana you know from modern maps. This Ghana sits further north and west, positioned perfectly at the intersection of two worlds. To the north, Berber traders cross the Sahara with salt, a commodity so valuable that it's traded weight for weight with gold. To the south, gold flows from rivers and mines that ancient sources describe with an awe-approaching reverence. Ghana doesn't mine this gold. That's crucial. Ghana controls the trade routes. The kingdom sits at the hinge point, the place where salt caravans from the Sahara meet gold merchants from the forests. Every transaction passes through Ghana's territory. Every transaction is taxed. The king of Ghana can field an army of 200,000 men, including 40,000 archers. His capital, Kumbisali, is actually two cities, one for the king and traditional religion, one for Muslim merchants. This isn't conflict. This is sophisticated coexistence, the kind that emerges when trade matters more than ideological purity. Al-Bakri, an Arab geographer writing in 1067, describes the king's court with something approaching disbelief. The king sits in a pavilion, surrounded by horses draped in gold-embroidered cloth. His governors prostrate themselves before him. When he gives audience, a page holds a gold-embroidered umbrella above him. Dogs wear collars of gold and silver. This is theater, yes. But it's theater that communicates something real. Centralized power, accumulated wealth, and the confidence to display both. But Ghana's wealth creates a problem the kingdom doesn't fully recognize yet. The gold has to come from somewhere. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles to the east, the Kanem Empire is solving a different puzzle. Kanem sits in the region around Lake Chad, a place where the Sahara begins to yield to the Sahel. It's a harder place to grow wealthy than Ghana's position on the gold routes. There are no gold fields here, no obvious commodity to tax. So Kanem builds power through something else: horses and soldiers. The Kanem cavalry becomes legendary. In a region where horses are expensive and difficult to maintain, the Kanem kings invest everything in mounted warriors. They raid southward into regions without cavalry, capturing people who become enslaved. They trade northward across the Sahara, exchanging captives for horses, weapons, and luxury goods from the Mediterranean world. This creates a terrible arithmetic. To maintain the cavalry, you need trade. To maintain the trade, you need captives. To get captives, you need successful raids. To ensure successful raids, you need more cavalry. It's a system that demands constant expansion. By the 11th century, Kanem's Mai, their kings, have converted to Islam not out of sudden spiritual revelation, but because Islam provides something valuable: connection to the wider commercial networks of the Muslim world, legal frameworks for governance, and literate administrators who can manage an increasingly complex state. The kingdom grows, the raids continue, the system functions. But it functions like a bicycle, stable only while moving forward, and now, shift your perspective entirely. Pivot from the Sahel to the highlands of East Africa. In the Ethiopian highlands, something ancient is evolving into something new. The Aksumite Empire had been a major power in late antiquity, a Christian kingdom that traded across the Red Sea, minted its own coins, and built stone obelisks that still stand today, some of them 70 feet tall, carved from single pieces of granite. But Aksum's decline in the 7th and 8th centuries, caused by climate change, the rise of Islam cutting off Mediterranean trade routes, and internal political fractures, left a vacuum. By 1137, a new dynasty emerges from the confusion, the Zagwe dynasty. The Zagwe kings do something remarkable with their reduced circumstances. Unable to compete commercially with the new Muslim powers controlling the Red Sea trade, they instead invest in architectural monumentalism that serves both spiritual and political purposes. They carve churches directly out of solid rock, not built, carved downward, into the earth. Lalibela, their capital, becomes a city of stone churches excavated from the bedrock, some standing freely within the pits carved around them, others still attached to the mountain itself. These aren't small chapels. The largest, Bet Medan Alam, measures 33 by 23 meters and stands 11 meters high, entirely carved from a single rock formation. This is power expressed through permanence, through the ability to command labor and vision on a scale that transforms landscape into theology. But here's what matters for the broader story. While Ghana controls trade and Kanem controls cavalry, Ethiopia is developing something else, a powerful mythological claim to legitimacy. The Zagwe rulers, and later the Solomonic dynasty that displaces them, claim descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, positioning Ethiopia not just as a Christian kingdom, but as a biblical one, with connections to ancient Israel that predate European Christianity. This matters. Mythology, when backed by real power, becomes political currency. Now, move south and west to the forests of West Africa, where a different kind of power is emerging. Ife. The city-states of the Yoruba people don't control gold routes or cavalry armies. Their power comes from something more fundamental: agricultural surplus, urban density, and artistic achievement that creates cultural prestige. Ife becomes a sacred city, the spiritual center of Yoruba land. Its rulers, the Uni, aren't just political leaders, they're religious authorities whose legitimacy flows from their connection to the divine. And they commission art that still astonishes today. The bronze and terracotta sculptures from Ife, dating to the 12th to 14th centuries, show a technical sophistication that European art wouldn't match until the Renaissance. The famous brass heads, naturalistic portraits of rulers and nobles, demonstrate lost wax casting techniques of extraordinary precision. When these sculptures were first shown in Europe in the early 20th century, European scholars literally couldn't believe Africans had made them. They proposed absurd theories: ancient Greeks, lost Egyptians, anybody but the obvious answer. But Ife's artists didn't need outside influence. They were solving problems of representation, proportion, and technique in their own context, for their own purposes. The city becomes a model. When the Kingdom of Benin rises to power in later centuries, its rulers claim legitimacy through connection to Ife, sending to the sacred city for royal regalia and establishing dynastic ties. This is soft power, cultural influence that shapes political legitimacy across regions. Cross the continent again to the East African coast. By the 10th century, the Swahili city-states are transforming the Indian Ocean world. These aren't kingdoms in the territorial sense. They're independent city-states, places like Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, and Mogadishu, each controlling its own harbor and hinterland, connected by language, Islam, and commercial networks that stretch from southern Africa to China. The word Swahili itself comes from the Arabic Sawahil, meaning coasts. These are coastal people, intermediaries between the African interior and the oceanic world. And they're getting rich. Gold from Great Zimbabwe travels north to these ports. Ivory comes from the interior in quantities that boggle the mind. Enslaved people, captured inland, are shipped across the Indian Ocean. In return, cloth from India, porcelain from China, beads from Southeast Asia flow in. Kilwa, by the 13th century, is minting its own coins, copper and silver currency that circulated across the western Indian Ocean. The Sultan of Kilwa builds a palace, Husuni Kubwa, with over 100 rooms, octagonal pools, and vaulted ceilings. The city's great mosque, built of coral stone, can hold 1,000 worshippers. But here's the crucial thing. These cities are African. The merchants are African. The rulers are African. Islam here isn't imposed from outside. It's adopted, adapted, and transformed into something distinctly Swahili. The architecture blends African, Arabic, and Persian influences. The language is Bantu with Arabic vocabulary. The culture synthesizes East African and Islamic traditions into something new. This isn't cultural subordination. It's cultural confidence, the ability to adopt useful elements from other societies while maintaining distinct identity. Finally, look south to the Zimbabwe Plateau. Sometime around 1100 CE, people begin building a city that will become known as Great Zimbabwe. They don't build with wood or mud. They build with granite blocks, carefully shaped to fit together without mortar. The walls rise 36 feet high in places, massive stone enclosures that serve purposes scholars still debate: royal residence, ritual center, administrative capital, all of these simultaneously. This isn't a fortress exactly. The walls don't have defensive features. They're about enclosure, about creating sacred or elite space, about demonstrating the ability to command labor on a scale that transforms landscape. At its height, Great Zimbabwe is home to perhaps 18,000 people. Cattle, hundreds of thousands of them, graze the surrounding areas. Gold is mined and worked into ornaments. Trade goods from the Swahili coast, beads, cloth, porcelain, end up in Great Zimbabwe's ruins, evidence of connections stretching to the Indian Ocean. The kingdom controls gold production and cattle wealth, combining them into a political economy that supports a centralized state for over 3 centuries. But here's what should be clear by now, as we stand at roughly 1200 CE, looking across this continent. Africa isn't waiting for history to begin. It's already happening. Multiple centers of power, different sources of wealth, competing political systems, urban centers, long-distance trade, artistic achievement, military power, religious authority. The web is complex. The connections are real. And now, the web is about to get much more complicated. Because what all of these kingdoms are about to discover is that wealth attracts attention, success creates competitors, and the decisions they make in the next few centuries about trade, religion, expansion, and adaptation will determine which kingdoms grow and which ones fade. The question isn't whether these kingdoms were powerful. The question is, what happens when power is tested? In 1235, a young man named Sundiata Keita does something that will echo for centuries. He destroys the kingdom of Soso and founds the Mali Empire. Ghana, remember, had controlled the gold trade for centuries. But by the 13th century, Ghana is fragmentating, weakened by Almoravid invasions from the north and internal fractures. Into this vacuum steps Sumanguru Kante, the Soso king, attempting to seize Ghana's old role as middleman in the gold trade. Sumanguru is, by all accounts, a terrifying ruler. The oral traditions describe him as a sorcerer king, wielding power through fear and occult knowledge. He raids the small kingdoms of the region, including the Mandinka people. Among the Mandinka, there's a minor prince named Sundiata, a name that means lion prince. According to the Epic of Sundiata, preserved through griots for centuries, the young prince overcomes a childhood disability to unite the Mandinka clans and challenge Soso. The historical reality beneath the legend shows political genius. Sundiata builds a coalition of kingdoms who all fear Soso's dominance. He leverages lineage claims and ritual authority. He promises a different kind of governance, decentralized, consensual, based on an assembly of rulers rather than autocratic domination. At the Battle of Kirina in 1235, Sundiata's coalition defeats Sumanguru. What happens next is more important than the battle itself. Sundiata doesn't simply take Sumanguru's place as tyrant. He establishes the Kurukan Fuga, often called the Mali Constitution, a set of principles governing the empire that includes property rights, social obligations, and rules of warfare. It's recited orally, preserved through griots, and it creates something new, an empire built on some degree of consent among subordinate kingdoms. This isn't democracy, but it's not simple conquest either. It's a system that allows Mali to grow massive while maintaining internal stability. By 1300, Mali is the largest empire in West African history. It stretches from the Atlantic coast to the edges of modern Nigeria, from the Sahara to the forests. It controls not just one gold-producing region, but multiple sources. It dominates the salt trade. Its capital, Niani, becomes a cosmopolitan center where scholars, merchants, and travelers from across the Islamic world converge. The empire's wealth becomes legendary. Which brings us to Mansa Musa. In 1324, Musa decides to make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, required of all Muslims who can afford it. He can't afford it. In fact, he brings so much gold that he fundamentally misunderstands the economic consequences of generosity at his scale. The caravan includes 60,000 people. Musa brings 12 tons of gold. He gives gold to everyone he meets. He builds mosques in every city he stops in. He's so generous in Cairo that the price of gold crashes, creating inflation that lasts for over a decade. Arab historians can't shut up about it. Al-Umari, writing 12 years after the visit, reports that Cairo's gold market still hadn't recovered. Musa was so alarmed by the economic damage he'd accidentally caused that on his return journey, he borrowed gold at high interest to remove money from circulation and stabilize prices. Think about that. A king so wealthy that his charity destabilizes international markets and so sophisticated that he understands how to correct the problem. But Musa's Hajj does something else, something that matters more in the long run. It announces Mali to the wider Islamic world. When Musa returns, he brings scholars, architects, and books. He builds libraries and mosques. Timbuktu, already a trading city, becomes a center of Islamic learning. The Sankore Mosque becomes associated with one of the great universities of the medieval world. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts are copied and studied, texts on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, Islamic law, history, and literature. This is wealth being converted into cultural capital, into infrastructure that outlasts any individual ruler. But here's the problem with building an empire on gold. You don't control whether the gold keeps flowing. Mali's success depends on maintaining stability in the gold-producing regions to the south, keeping the Saharan trade routes safe, and preventing rival powers from establishing alternative routes. By the late 14th century, all three conditions are fraying. The gold regions begin to resist Mali's authority. Mossi raiders from the south attack Mali's cities, including Timbuktu. The provinces are too large, the distance is too great for centralized control to hold against determined local resistance. And to the east, something new is rising. The Songhai people living along the Niger River had been subordinate to Mali for decades. Their capital, Gao, was a major trading city, but politically secondary to Mali's core. In 1464, a Songhai ruler named Sunni Ali begins a military campaign that will transform West Africa. Sunni Ali is a military genius and, according to Muslim chroniclers, a problematic Muslim at best. He maintains traditional religious practices alongside Islam, which outrages the scholarly establishment but appeals to many of his soldiers and subjects. More importantly, he understands something crucial: control the rivers, control the region. He builds a navy. In a landlocked region, this sounds absurd, but the Niger River is the highway of West Africa. Whoever controls the river controls trade, communication, and military mobility. Sunni Ali conquers Timbuktu in 1468, Jenne in 1473. He pushes Mali back, establishing Songhai as the new dominant power. His cavalry is massive. His tactical innovations, using both mounted soldiers and riverborne troops, make him nearly unstoppable. When he dies in 1492, his empire is positioned to become the largest state in African history. But his religious heterodoxy creates a succession crisis. One of Sunni Ali's generals, Muhammad Toure, seizes power in 1493, taking the title Askia Muhammad. Askia is everything Sunni Ali wasn't, religiously speaking. He's a devout Muslim who makes the Hajj, consults with Islamic scholars, and establishes Songhai as an explicitly Islamic state. He reorganizes the empire's administration along bureaucratic lines, appointing ministers for finance, justice, agriculture, and military affairs. Under Askia Muhammad, Songhai expands even further than Mali at its height. It controls the salt mines of Taghaza in the Sahara, the gold fields to the south, and the entire middle Niger River region. The empire's territory spans roughly 1,400,000 square kilometers. Timbuktu flourishes as never before. The Sankore Mosque's associated scholars produce and collect manuscripts at an astonishing rate. Students come from across the Islamic world to study law, theology, and science. But here's what's happening beneath the surface. Songhai's expansion is creating administrative strains. The empire is militarily powerful, but structurally fragile. It relies heavily on the Askia's personal authority and on military might to keep distant provinces in line. The royal succession isn't clearly defined. When Askia Muhammad grows old and blind, his sons fight over the succession, deposing him in 1528. The next decades see repeated coups and counter-coups. The empire remains powerful, but the seeds of instability are planted. And meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, different kingdoms are facing different pressures. In the Ethiopian highlands, the Solomonic dynasty has displaced the Zagwe rulers and is building something ambitious, a Christian empire in an increasingly Islamic region. The Solomonic emperors claim descent from Solomon and Sheba, positioning themselves as the legitimate preservers of ancient Christian traditions. They commission new versions of the Kebra Nagast, the Glory of Kings, which tells the story of the Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon and establishes Ethiopia's claim to biblical importance. This isn't just mythology, it's foreign policy. Ethiopia is surrounded by Muslim sultanates, Adal to the east, various states to the north and west. The Christian kingdom maintains its independence through a combination of highland geography, military effectiveness, and diplomatic maneuvering. The emperors also reach out to European Christian powers, seeking alliances against shared Muslim rivals. Letters are exchanged with Portuguese monarchs and the Pope. European Christians, familiar with the legend of Prester John, a mythical Christian king somewhere in the east, convinced themselves that Ethiopia might be his kingdom. But in the early 16th century, this delicate balance shatters. Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, known as Ahmad Gragn, Ahmad the Left-Handed, the Imam of the Adal Sultanate, launches a jihad against Christian Ethiopia in 1529. Ahmad is a military revolutionary. He equips his forces with firearms purchased from the Ottomans. Against Ethiopian armies still fighting primarily with traditional weapons, this is decisive. For over a decade, Ahmad's forces devastate the Ethiopian highlands. Churches are destroyed, manuscripts burned, populations converted or killed. The Ethiopian emperor, Dawit II, is desperate. He sends requests for help to the Portuguese, who had recently established themselves on the East African coast. In 1541, Portuguese musketeers arrive, 400 men with firearms and military expertise. It's barely enough. The combined Ethiopian-Portuguese forces managed to kill Ahmad Gragan in 1543, but not before huge portions of Ethiopia's cultural heritage are destroyed. Ethiopia survives, but it's traumatized, weakened, and increasingly aware of a new reality. The age of firearms has begun, and those with access to European or Ottoman weapons have decisive advantages over those without. On the Swahili coast, a different transformation is underway. The Portuguese arrive in the Indian Ocean in 1498, when Vasco da Gama rounds the Cape of Good Hope and sails up the East African coast. The Portuguese aren't interested in trade on equal terms. They want control. They want to dominate the spice routes to India, which means controlling the ports along the way. In 1505, the Portuguese attacked Kilwa, the wealthiest of the Swahili city-states. They burned parts of the city, forced the Sultan to accept Portuguese overlordship, and establish a fortress. They do the same to Sofala, Mozambique, and eventually Mombasa. But here's the thing. The Portuguese don't have the manpower or resources to actually conquer the entire coast. They can control specific ports, but the Swahili city-states continue to function, trade continues, and the Portuguese are largely dependent on the very merchants they're trying to dominate. It's an unstable arrangement, enforced through periodic violence but never complete. Some Swahili cities resist effectively. Others negotiate, accepting nominal Portuguese authority while maintaining practical independence. Still, others decline as trade routes shift. The arrival of the Portuguese doesn't end Swahili civilization, but it introduces a new, unpredictable force into the Indian Ocean world. European powers willing to use military force to monopolize trade, but not yet capable of full conquest. The old networks bend. They don't break, not yet. But the balance of power is shifting in ways the Swahili merchants are only beginning to understand. In the forests of West Africa, the Kingdom of Benin is at its height. Benin City, by the 15th and 16th centuries, is one of the largest cities in the world. Portuguese traders who visit describe it with genuine awe. The city is organized on a grid pattern with broad avenues. The Oba's palace complex is massive, with galleries and courtyards decorated with brass plaques depicting the kingdom's history. The Dutch trader Ulfert Dapper, writing in the 17th century based on earlier accounts, describes Benin City as comparable to Amsterdam in size and organization. The kingdom's power comes from multiple sources: control of trade routes to the coast, a highly centralized political system under the Oba, an effective military organization that allows Benin to dominate its neighbors. But Benin is also famous for something else: its art. The brass casting tradition reaches extraordinary heights. The famous Benin bronzes, actually mostly brass, depict Obas, court officials, warriors, and animals with stunning naturalism and detail. When Portuguese traders arrive in 1485, they're not encountering some backward kingdom waiting for European civilization. They're encountering a sophisticated state with its own artistic traditions, complex governance, and clear ideas about what it wants from trade. Benin wants firearms and textiles. It offers pepper, ivory, and initially, enslaved people. But here's where Benin does something remarkable. After several decades of participating in the slave trade, the Oba restricts it, limiting European access to enslaved people and focusing instead on pepper and ivory. Why? The sources aren't completely clear, but it seems to be a deliberate political decision. The Oba recognizes that the slave trade is destabilizing the region, creating constant warfare as kingdoms raid each other for captives to sell. Benin, strong enough to resist European pressure, chooses differently. For a time. But across West Africa, the slave trade is beginning to reshape everything. Initially, the Portuguese want gold and spices. Enslaved Africans are a secondary commodity. But the development of sugar plantations in the Americas creates new demand. Sugar cultivation is brutal, labor-intensive work. Death rates on plantations are horrific. The system requires constant new supplies of workers. European traders turn to Africa, and they find willing partners among African kingdoms and merchants who see opportunity in the trade. This is where the story gets morally complex in ways that demand honesty. Europeans didn't show up on empty coasts and kidnap millions of people. The Atlantic slave trade functioned because of African participation, kings, merchants, and raiders who sold captives to European traders. This happened for reasons we need to understand without excusing. Many African kingdoms had existing systems of slavery, conquered enemies, debt bondsmen, people captured in raids. When Europeans offered valuable goods, firearms, textiles, metal, alcohol, in exchange for captives, some African rulers saw a profitable trade. The firearms mattered especially. Once one kingdom had guns, its neighbors needed guns to defend themselves. This created an arms race where participating in the slave trade became, for many kingdoms, a matter of survival. The Kingdom of Kongo in Central Africa becomes deeply entangled in this system. The Congo had converted to Christianity in the 1490s after Portuguese contact. The king, Afonso I, corresponds with Portuguese monarchs as a fellow Christian ruler. He sends his sons to study in Portugal. He builds churches. He seems to genuinely embrace Christianity as a tool for modernizing his kingdom. But by the 1520s, Afonso is writing desperate letters to the Portuguese king, begging him to stop the slave trade or at least regulate it. Portuguese traders, working with Congo nobles, are kidnapping people, including nobles, and even relatives of the king. The kingdom is being destabilized by the very trade Afonso had initially participated in. His letters are ignored. The profit motive overwhelms diplomatic courtesy. What's beginning here, in the early 16th century, is a transformation that will accelerate over the next 2 centuries. African kingdoms being pulled into an Atlantic economy that progressively warps their political priorities, creates destructive incentives for warfare, and undermines the stability of the very states participating in it. But we're not there yet. Not quite. In the early 1500s, African kingdoms still have agency. They still make choices. They can still resist, negotiate, or refuse European demands. The question is, as the demand for enslaved people grows, and as the price paid in firearms and goods increases, how many kingdoms will have the power to say no? And what will happen to those that do? In 1591, something happens that shouldn't be possible. A Moroccan army crosses the Sahara Desert, 1,500 miles of the most hostile terrain on Earth, and invades Songhai. This is insane logistics. The Moroccan Sultan, Ahmad al-Mansur, sends roughly 4,000 men, many of them armed with arquebuses and muskets, across the desert. Half of them die on the march. The survivors arrive exhausted, thirsty, and far from any possible reinforcement. But they have guns. Songhai has spears, swords, cavalry, and an army that vastly outnumbers the Moroccans. At the Battle of Tondabi, the Songhai army charges the Moroccan position. The Moroccans fire their weapons. The noise, the smoke, the devastating effect of gunfire on massed troops. It breaks the Songhai charge. Askia Ishak II's army dissolves in panic. The largest empire in West African history effectively collapses in a single afternoon. This isn't about Moroccan military genius. It's about a technological gap that makes traditional advantages, numbers, cavalry, knowledge of terrain, suddenly insufficient. The Moroccans occupy Gao and Timbuktu. They loot what they can. They try to establish control. But here's the thing. They can't actually govern the empire they've just shattered. They're too few, too far from home, too isolated. Over the following decades, the Moroccan garrisons in the Niger region become effectively independent, mixing with local populations, converting into a new merchant warrior class called the Arma. Songhai doesn't recover. The centralized state fragments into smaller kingdoms. Timbuktu declines. The trans-Saharan trade routes shift and contract. The age of the great Sudanic empires is ending, not because of gradual decline, but because firearms have changed the calculus of power. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the continent, the Mutapa Empire in southeastern Africa is facing its own crisis. Mutapa had risen from the decline of Great Zimbabwe, controlling the gold trade from the interior to the East African coast. The Portuguese, established in coastal forts, want access to those gold fields. At first, the relationship is almost collegial. The Portuguese send priests and traders. The Mutapa allows limited Portuguese settlement in the interior, trade flows. But Portuguese ambitions grow. They want monopoly control. They want direct access to mines. They start making demands backed by military threats. In 1571, a Portuguese-backed pretender to the Mutapa throne creates civil war. The Portuguese intervene directly, installing their preferred candidate. This begins a century-long process where the Mutapa state progressively loses sovereignty. Portuguese traders establish prazos, essentially feudal estates, in Mutapa territory. They marry into local aristocracies. They build private armies of enslaved Africans. The Mutapa Mwene king becomes increasingly dependent on Portuguese support to maintain power against rivals. This dependence becomes subordination. By the mid-17th century, the Mutapa is essentially a client of Portuguese interests. But here's what's crucial. This doesn't happen through straightforward conquest. It happens through a grinding process of economic pressure, strategic marriages, internal political manipulation, and selective military intervention. The kingdom doesn't fall to a foreign invasion. It gets hollowed out from within, as Portuguese traders become an essential but parasitic part of the political economy. And gold production, ironically, declines. The Portuguese never get the flood of gold they expected. Their intervention destabilizes the very system they wanted to exploit. In West Africa, the slave trade is accelerating beyond anyone's early projections. By the mid-17th century, we're not talking about thousands of people annually. We're talking about tens of thousands, and the numbers keep climbing. European demand is insatiable. Sugar plantations in Brazil and the Caribbean consume human lives at a horrifying rate. The demographic catastrophe this creates is only beginning. The Kingdom of Dahomey, rising in the 17th century in what's now Benin, builds its entire economic and political system around slave raiding. Dahomey develops a powerful military, including the famous Dahomey Amazons, female soldiers who serve as elite royal guards and combat troops. The kingdom conducts annual raids into neighboring territories, capturing people to sell to European traders at the coastal ports. This isn't opportunistic raiding, it's systematic state-organized predation. Dahomey's kings become immensely wealthy. The capital, Abomey, fills with European goods. The royal palace grows into a sprawling complex, decorated with reliefs and symbols commemorating military victories. But this creates a trap. The kingdom's economy becomes dependent on the slave trade. Its military is organized around raiding. Its neighbors arm themselves in response, creating regional militarization. The entire area destabilizes into near-constant warfare. Some historians call this gun-slave cycle. Kingdoms trade enslaved people for guns, use guns to raid for more enslaved people, creating an escalating cycle of violence that no single kingdom can safely withdraw from. Because if you stop participating, your neighbors, armed with European weapons, will raid you instead. The Asante Empire, rising in the late 17th century in what's now Ghana, tries a different approach. Asante begins as a small kingdom among the Akan people. In 1701, a chief priest named Okomfo Anokia performs a remarkable political ritual. He summons a golden stool from the sky, which descends and rests on the knees of Osei Tutu, the Asante Hene, Asante king. This isn't just theater. Well, it is theater, but theater that does something politically crucial. It provides a unifying symbol for confederated Akan states and establishes Osei Tutu's divine mandate to rule. The golden stool, according to Asante belief, contains the soul of the nation. It can never touch the ground. Even the Asante Hene doesn't sit on it. He sits on a separate throne beside it. With this symbolic foundation, Osei Tutu builds a powerful centralized state. He establishes a capital at Kumasi, creates a bureaucratic administration, and builds an army that conquers neighboring kingdoms. Asante participates in the slave trade. It has access to European goods through coastal contacts and needs firearms to maintain military superiority. But the kingdom also develops alternative economic bases: gold mining, cola nut trade, and craft production. This diversification gives Asante more leverage with European traders. The kingdom isn't desperately dependent on slave trading. It can negotiate from a position of relative strength. By the mid-18th century, Asante is the dominant power in the region, controlling trade routes and subordinate kingdoms, maintaining a degree of autonomy that kingdoms more fully dependent on the slave trade have lost. But the diversification only works because Asante is militarily strong enough to enforce favorable terms. Weaker kingdoms don't have that option. In Central Africa, the Kingdom of Congo is disintegrating. Remember Afonso's desperate letters in the 1520s? His warnings were prophetic. By the mid-17th century, Congo is being torn apart by succession conflicts, Portuguese interference, and the destabilizing effects of the slave trade. Competing factions ally with Portuguese traders or with Dutch interlopers. Civil wars break out repeatedly. In 1665, at the Battle of Mbwila, Portuguese forces kill the Congo king, Antonio Thirst. His head is displayed in Luanda, the Portuguese colonial capital. The kingdom fragments into competing factions, each claiming legitimacy, none able to assert effective control. The capital, Mbanza Congo, which the Portuguese had renamed São Salvador, is abandoned and falls into ruins. For over 40 years, there's no recognized king. The kingdom exists in name only. When a king is eventually crowned in 1709, he rules over a fraction of the former kingdom's territory, and even that control is contested. The Kingdom of Kongo becomes a cautionary tale, a state that embraced Christianity, established diplomatic relations with European powers, and attempted to engage with the Atlantic world on cooperative terms, only to be systematically destabilized and destroyed by the very forces it had tried to partner with. East Africa, meanwhile, is experiencing its own transformations. The Omani Arabs, based in Muscat, are expanding their influence down the East African coast, challenging Portuguese dominance. In 1698, Omani forces besiege Fort Jesus in Mombasa, the major Portuguese stronghold on the coast. The siege lasts 33 months. When Fort Jesus finally falls in 1698, Portuguese power on the East African coast is effectively broken. The Omanis don't replace Portuguese control with their own colonial administration, at least not immediately. Instead, they restore a version of the old Swahili city-state system, with local rulers accepting Omani overlordship and paying tribute. This is a lighter touch than Portuguese governance, and for a time, the Swahili cities revive. Trade increases. Zanzibar, in particular, becomes increasingly important. But the nature of that trade is changing. The Omani period sees intensification of the East African slave trade. Enslaved people from the interior are marched to the coast and shipped across the Indian Ocean to Arabia, Persia, and India. The numbers don't initially match the Atlantic slave trade, but they're substantial and growing. The interior kingdoms, places like the emerging Buganda in the Great Lakes region, find themselves pressured by coastal demand for slaves and ivory. Some kingdoms resist, others participate. Most do both, depending on immediate circumstances and power balances. The constant is pressure, external economic forces, creating incentives for warfare, raiding, and political instability. In southern Africa, a new power is rising that will dominate the 19th century. The Zulu Kingdom emerges from a period of intense regional conflict known as the Methekani, a word meaning the crushing or the scattering. The causes are debated: population pressure, competition for resources, climate stress, and the distant effects of slave trading from both coasts all play roles. The result is a period of warfare and migration that reshapes the entire region. Shaka, who becomes Zulu king in 1816, revolutionizes African warfare in the region. He reorganizes the military into a regimental system based on age grades. He introduces new tactics, the horns of the buffalo formation that envelops enemy forces. He replaces throwing spears with short stabbing spears for close combat. He enforces brutal discipline and constant drilling. The result is a military machine that conquers neighboring chiefdoms with devastating efficiency. Shaka's kingdom expands rapidly. Defeated groups flee, creating ripple effects across southern Africa. Some flee north, establishing new kingdoms hundreds of miles away. Others are absorbed into the Zulu state. The Zulu success is military, but it's also political. Shaka integrates conquered peoples into the Zulu identity. He doesn't maintain them as subordinate ethnic groups. He makes them Zulu, assigning them to regiments, incorporating them into the national culture. But this military state requires constant expansion. The regimental system needs victories to maintain morale and cohesion. The kingdom needs captured cattle to distribute as rewards. It's another system built on forward momentum, stable only while expanding. And expansion has limits. By the early 19th century, the pieces are moving toward collision. European powers are undergoing industrial revolution. Their economic needs are changing. Their technological capabilities are exploding. The slave trade, which has shaped Atlantic Africa for 3 centuries, is beginning to be questioned. Not everywhere, not consistently, but the abolitionist movement in Britain is gaining strength. In 1807, Britain bans the slave trade, though not slavery itself in British colonies. The British Navy begins patrolling African waters, interdicting slave ships. This isn't humanitarian intervention for its own sake. Britain has economic and political motivations, undermining rival powers, opening Africa to different forms of trade, establishing moral authority to justify other interventions. But whatever the motivations, it fundamentally disrupts the Atlantic economy that many African kingdoms have built their power around. Kingdoms that depended on slave trading revenues face a crisis. Some shift to legitimate trade, palm oil, rubber, ivory. Others resist the British pressure and continue slave trading despite interdiction. The British response is to establish more coastal forts, to make treaties with coastal chiefs, to intervene more directly in African politics. Each intervention creates precedents for deeper involvement. Meanwhile, European explorers are penetrating the interior. David Livingstone, Richard Burton, John Speke, others. They're mapping rivers, documenting resources, and writing accounts that portray Africa as a land of both exotic wonder and desperate need for European civilization. The stage is being set for something unprecedented. For centuries, European presence in Africa was limited to coastal forts and trading posts. The African kingdoms of the interior maintained independence, even as coastal areas faced mounting pressure. But in the 19th century, the balance of power shifts decisively. Steamships allow navigation of African rivers. The telegraph enables rapid communication. Modern medicine, quinine for malaria, allows Europeans to survive in tropical climates. Railroads can project power inland. And firearms, now breech-loading rifles, machine guns, create military advantages that African kingdoms can't counter. African kingdoms face a terrible situation. The rules of the game are changing faster than they can adapt. The political skills that worked for centuries, playing European powers off each other, controlling trade bottlenecks, maintaining military parity with neighbors, are becoming insufficient. Some kingdoms try to modernize rapidly, importing European weapons and advisors, reorganizing their militaries, sending missions abroad. Others resist, betting on traditional strengths. Still, others try to negotiate, seeking protection or alliance with European powers. Almost none of these strategies will work, because what's coming isn't another trade relationship or a coastal presence. What's coming is conquest. In 1879, the British invade Zululand. The Zulu military, remember, is the most effective fighting force in southern Africa. Shaka's innovations have been refined over decades. The impis, Zulu regiments, have won countless victories. The British bring modern rifles, artillery, and the confidence of an industrial empire. At Isandlwana, on January 22, 1879, 20,000 Zulu warriors attack a British camp. The Zulu use their traditional encirclement tactics. They close with British positions despite rifle fire. They win. Over 1,300 British soldiers are killed. It's one of the worst defeats in British military history. News of Isandlwana shocks the British Empire. How could savages defeat professional soldiers? But the British don't withdraw. They reinforce. At Ulundi, 6 months later, the British form a massive square, infantry in disciplined ranks, Gatling guns and artillery at the corners. The Zulu attack with extraordinary courage, charging directly into concentrated fire. They break against modern weaponry. The kingdom is defeated. The British annex Zululand. The military system Shaka built is dismantled. The Zulu had the best traditional military in the region, perhaps on the continent. They defeated a British force in open battle. It wasn't enough. This pattern repeats across Africa in the late 19th century. African kingdoms that had maintained independence for centuries, that had sophisticated political systems and effective militaries, are defeated. Not because they're incompetent or passive, but because the technological gap has become unbridgeable. In West Africa, the Asante Empire is facing its own reckoning with British power. Asante, remember, had maintained independence and commercial leverage throughout the slave trade era. The kingdom's interior position, its military strength, and its economic diversification gave it negotiating power. But by the late 19th century, British interests in West Africa are shifting from coastal trade to territorial control. They want to secure the resources of the interior: gold, timber, agricultural products. They want to eliminate African intermediaries and establish direct colonial administration. The British make escalating demands on Asante. They want the kingdom to accept British protection, which means accepting British authority. They want to access the interior without Asante interference. The Asante refuse. Between 1824 and 1900, the British and Asante fight multiple wars. The Asante win some early engagements. They're formidable opponents, well-organized and strategically sophisticated. But each war sees the British return with more troops, better weapons, and greater determination. In 1874, British forces capture and burn Kumasi, the Asante capital. The Golden Stool, the soul of the nation, is hidden to prevent its capture. The Asante rebuild, but British pressure continues. In 1896, the British demand the Golden Stool be surrendered. The Asante refuse. The British arrest and exile the Asante. In 1900, a British governor demands to sit on the Golden Stool, an act of such profound disrespect that it triggers final rebellion. Ya Asantewa, the Queen Mother of Ejisu, leads the resistance. The British suppress the rebellion with overwhelming force. The Asante Empire is formally annexed. A kingdom that had maintained independence for 2 centuries, that had negotiated skillfully and fought effectively, is absorbed into British colonial administration. In North Africa, resistance takes different forms. The Sokoto Caliphate, founded through jihad in the early 19th century by Usman Dan Fodio, controls a vast territory across what's now northern Nigeria. Sokoto is religiously legitimized, administratively sophisticated, and economically powerful. It's one of the largest states in Africa at the time. The British approach from the coast, establishing what they call protectorates and signing treaties with smaller kingdoms. Frederick Lugard, the British administrator, develops a system called indirect rule. Rather than dismantling African political structures, the British use existing rulers as subordinate administrators governing through them. This is cheaper than direct administration and creates a veneer of continuity. When the British finally move against Sokoto in 1903, they do so rapidly, with modern weapons and coordinated attacks. The Caliph's forces are defeated. The Caliphate is dissolved. But the British then install Sokoto's traditional rulers as indirect administrators under British authority, preserving the form while gutting the substance. This becomes the model for British colonialism across much of Africa. Maintain African traditional authorities, but subordinate them to colonial administration. Let them handle local governance, but strip away their sovereignty. In Ethiopia, something different happens. Ethiopia, remember, had maintained independence for millennia, survived Ahmad Gran's invasion with Portuguese help, and developed a strong sense of national identity rooted in Christianity and biblical lineage. In the late 19th century, Emperor Menelik II is modernizing aggressively. He imports European firearms, tens of thousands of rifles. He reorganizes the military. He plays European powers off against each other, accepting advisors and weapons from France, Russia, and Italy, while avoiding subordination to any of them. Italy, unified only in 1870 and late to the colonial game, wants an African empire to prove its great power status. In 1889, the Italians signed the Treaty of Vucale with Menelik. The treaty's Italian version claims Ethiopia has accepted Italian protection, essentially colonial status. The Amharic version says no such thing. When Menelik discovers the discrepancy, he repudiates the Italian interpretation. The Italians invade. At Adwa, on March 1, 1896, Menelik's modernized army meets the Italian invasion force. The Ethiopians have 100,000 soldiers, including rifle-armed infantry and artillery. The Italians have about 15,000 men, plus Eritrean colonial troops. The Ethiopians use terrain expertly, coordinate multiple divisions, and demonstrate that an African army, properly armed and led, can defeat a European power using modern tactics. The Italians are routed. Over 5,000 Italian soldiers are killed or captured. Ethiopia remains independent, the only African nation other than Liberia to avoid colonial conquest in the scramble for Africa. But Adwa is the exception that proves the rule. Ethiopia won because Menelik modernized rapidly, because Ethiopia's highland geography aided defense, because the Italians were overconfident and poorly prepared. Most African kingdoms didn't have that combination of advantages. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 formalized what was already happening. European powers met in Berlin without a single African representative to establish rules for colonizing Africa. The key principle: effective occupation. If you could demonstrate administrative control over a territory, other European powers would recognize your claim. This triggered a race. European powers rushed to establish treaties, military posts, and administrative presence across the continent. The result is a map of Africa carved into territories bearing no relationship to existing political entities, cultural boundaries, or geographic logic. A straight line through the Sahara becomes a border. The Congo, a vast territory, becomes the personal property of Belgian King Leopold II. West African kingdoms find themselves split between French and British zones. The violence this requires varies by region. Some kingdoms sign treaties, not understanding that protection means subordination. Others resist and are crushed militarily. Still, others navigate as best they can, maintaining local authority while accepting European overlordship. In the Congo Free State, Leopold's private colonial venture, the violence reaches genocidal proportions. Congolese people are forced to harvest rubber under a quota system enforced through mutilation and murder. Entire regions are depopulated. When the extent of the atrocities becomes public in the early 20th century, photographs of children with hands cut off, testimony of massacres, international outrage forces Leopold to cede the territory to the Belgian government. But the colony continues. The extraction continues. Only the administrative structure changes. By 1914, the map of Africa is almost entirely colored in European imperial shades. France controls vast territories across West and North Africa. Britain holds a discontinuous empire from Cairo to the Cape. Portugal maintains Angola and Mozambique. Germany has Tanganyika, Namibia, and Cameroon. Italy has Libya and Eritrea. Belgium has the Congo. Spain holds small territories in the northwest. Only Ethiopia and Liberia remain independent. This happened in roughly 30 years, a historical eye blink. The kingdoms that had existed for centuries are now tribal authorities within colonial administrations. Their kings are chiefs who govern at European pleasure. Their sovereignty is extinguished. Some collaborators do relatively well under the new system. Rulers who accepted colonial authority early, who helped administer their territories for European powers, often maintain wealth and local prestige. Others lose everything. Kingdoms that resisted too effectively see their leadership executed or exiled, their territories confiscated, their people dispersed or conscripted. The economic transformation is total. Colonial economies are extractive by design. Africans are forced to grow cash crops, cotton, coffee, cocoa, palm oil for export. The profits flow to Europe. Taxes are imposed, payable only in colonial currency, forcing Africans into wage labor or cash crop production to get money. Traditional economic systems, complex regional trade networks, sophisticated agricultural practices, pastoral economies are disrupted or destroyed. Infrastructure development is entirely oriented toward extraction, railroads from interior resources to coastal ports, none connecting African regions to each other. The social transformation is equally profound. Colonial education systems teach African children that their own histories are irrelevant, their cultures primitive, their religions superstition. Christianity spreads rapidly, often displacing or syncretizing with traditional religions. New social hierarchies emerge based on proximity to colonial power, education in European languages, and adoption of European cultural practices. But here's what's crucial to understand. This didn't happen because African kingdoms were passive or incompetent. It happened because the balance of power shifted with unprecedented speed. In 1800, African kingdoms negotiated with European traders as equals or near equals. By 1900, they were conquered subjects. The Industrial Revolution, modern weaponry, new medicines allowing European survival in Africa, and European political organization around nationalist imperial competition created conditions where resistance, however brave, wasn't sufficient. The tragedy isn't that African kingdoms failed to resist. The tragedy is that resistance failed despite extraordinary effort. Stand at 1914, at the edge of World War I, and look at what's been lost. Ghana, Mali, Songhai, empires that controlled the gold trade and built cities of learning, exist now only in memory and ruined stone. The Swahili city-states, cosmopolitan centers connecting Africa to the Indian Ocean world, are provincial towns in British East Africa. Great Zimbabwe's stone walls stand empty, their builders' descendants dispersed, their political systems destroyed. Asante's golden stool is hidden in the forest, the empire that revered it now administered by British officials. Benin City, once comparable to Amsterdam, was burned by British forces in 1897. Its art, thousands of bronze plaques and sculptures, was looted and sold to European museums where it remains today. The Kingdom of Kongo, which sent ambassadors to Rome and corresponded with European monarchs as equals, is a geographic expression in Portuguese Angola. Ethiopia stands independent but isolated, its victory at Adwa buying it time but not security. Everywhere, knowledge has been lost, oral histories interrupted, manuscripts burned or scattered, political systems dismantled, trade networks severed. But here's what colonialism couldn't destroy: memory, culture, and the fundamental capacity for self-organization that built these kingdoms in the first place. The colonial period will last roughly 60, 80 years for most of Africa, a long human lifetime, but a brief moment in historical terms. And during that period, under colonial rule, Africans will continue to organize, to resist, to preserve what can be preserved, and adapt what must change. The independence movements that will eventually dismantle colonial empires in the mid-20th century don't emerge from nowhere. They grow from the same soil that produced the kingdoms we've been discussing, from political traditions of governance, from cultural memory of independence, from the accumulated experience of organization and resistance. When Kwame Nkrumah leads Ghana to independence in 1957, he names it Ghana, deliberately invoking the medieval empire, because the past matters, because continuity matters, because the memory of African power and achievement isn't dead. The story of African kingdoms doesn't end with colonialism. It transforms. It continues in different forms. It survives in cultural practices, in political ideas, in the stubborn refusal to accept the colonial narrative of African inferiority. The kingdoms we've traced, from the Sahel to the highlands, to the coasts, to the southern savannas, weren't primitive precursors to civilization. They were civilizations, plural, sophisticated, and diverse, rising and falling according to the same forces that shape all human societies: geography, trade, military power, political skill, religious authority, cultural confidence, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. They built in stone and copper and gold. They wrote in Arabic and Ge'ez and Swahili. They traded across continents. They developed distinctive artistic traditions. They created political systems that governed millions. And they were destroyed not because they were weak or backward, but because the world changed around them faster than they could adapt, because technological revolutions in distant continents created power imbalances that no amount of courage or skill could overcome. That's the story. Not a story of waiting for civilization to arrive. A story of civilizations that existed, that rose and fell, that shaped the lives of millions, that connected to the wider world as agents and participants, that made history rather than being passively subjected to it. Until, quite suddenly in historical terms, the balance of power shifted so dramatically that independence became impossible to maintain. What happened next? Colonialism, independence, the struggle to build modern African nations from the fragments of colonial territories, that's another story. But it's a story that only makes sense if you understand what came before. If you understand that Africa had kingdoms, empires, cities, and civilizations that were destroyed, not because they never existed, but because they did. And now you know. Now you understand what was lost, and why it mattered, and why the story needed to be told.